creation, income losses, people going out of the workforce have been critical economic issues even before the pandemic. The pandemic only made it worse. Earlier this week, we had contradictory headlines that caught our attention, and we thought we should try and figure out what this is. There was one headline which said, and I'll quote, "Jobs up 29% since 2013, says survey." On the same day, there was another headline in another newspaper which said, "Recovery to gather pace, but worries over jobs remain." So what really is happening? Are jobs getting created? Are jobs not getting created? Job losses continue. People are struggling for employment, which means income. Professor Ila Patnaik will explain and answer our questions there. And I will not welcome her to her own show, as one of our readers pointed out. So Ila, what exactly is happening on the jobs front before you explain what you have so insightfully done in your column about the data? But before we go to the data points, are jobs being created or not?
See, YP, if I was to give an answer, then it has to be based on some data or the other.
Okay.
Whether jobs are being created since 2012-13, whether jobs are being created post-COVID, whether there was job loss in COVID and how much there was and in which sectors. It all comes down to what sort of data you're looking at, and then you can, based on that, say how much. So, I think it's too obvious a thing to say that since 2012 jobs have been created. Of course, jobs have been created since 2012-13. It is also very obvious that jobs were lost during COVID. Okay, I don't think there's a question about that. The question I think that we can answer with the help of data is how much, where, in which sectors, when, and what do we expect looking forward in terms of our understanding of what the data is going to be able to tell us. So I think that's why we have focused the column on, let's not just look at this first starting point of the data and try to draw conclusions and get answers to all our questions. All of us have many questions about jobs, and let's just simply try to understand what is employment data and what can it help us understand, and then the little bit that we have, we try and make sense out of that.
So you have written in your column, which we will share with our viewers in the description of the video after this video is published, that there are two different ways of measuring jobs. Can you explain those two different ways of measuring jobs?
Yeah, so like you said, that we saw contradictory headlines. So what did we see? One way of measuring jobs is to ask firms, employers, at how many people do you employ? Somebody could come to ThePrint and say, YP, you're the managing editor, tell us, how many people have you employed? What sort of salaries have you paid? Have you cut employment in the last quarter, typically? So, for example, the survey that is being done is going to be quarterly. So, have you cut the number of jobs in the last quarter, or have you cut salaries in the last quarter? When you respond, the data from the firm's side is one way of looking at jobs. And what that really does is that you specify, okay, which are the sectors we are going to look at, what is the size of the firms we are going to look at. So, for example, if you look at firms above size 10, means who employ at least 10 people, then they are typically they are what we call the formal sector firms. So, you're looking at formal sector, and you're looking at, say, what this employment survey does is you look at 9 non-farm sectors. So you're basically deciding what to look at from the side of the firm. In contrast, what you can also have, and we have that as well, is look at it from the side of the household. So you go to households and you ask them. So that's the labor supply side, whereas the first one was the demand side. So for the labor supply side, you ask for households, how many people in this household are working. So suppose it's a small family with the husband, wife and 2 children, and they say 2 of us are working. Then you ask them, did they have jobs in the previous quarter? If they say yes, they had in the previous quarter, do they have jobs? Or you ask them, do you have a job today?
Okay.
So, employment numbers have been based on various kinds of surveys, where in the past we used to look at your different kinds of status of employment. When were you employed? So one could be that, like the periodic labor force survey, you ask urban households, do you have a job today? And if you'd asked the same household last quarter whether they had a job and they'd said no, then that means employment increased. Or people might switch jobs, you ask them, in what sector are you employed? So that's way of looking at it from the household side, from the supplier side is the other side. So those are the 2 ways we are looking at jobs. In the second, it could be an informal sector job, it could be self-employed. A person just stands at the corner and sells fruit, and then he stops doing that. So then he feels he's become unemployed. So whether it's self-employed, informal sector, formal sector, that's one way of looking at it, asking the household.
And the supplier side has been the traditional way of looking at it, and the demand from the employer side is the new way of looking at it.
Not really. So if you look around the world, then typically, employment data. So I worked on business cycles, and in fact, when I first started working on business cycles right after my PhD, I, typically, as all young economists do, one says, okay, what is the data I need to look at? Quarterly data for employment, sales, hours worked, and orders. And so this was a project that I started working on right after my PhD at NCAR. And I realized we don't have employment data, and the typical employment data or payroll data that is available almost everywhere in the world is from the employer's side. We also tried to have that data, and in 2018 that series was stopped because the numbers were way off what EPFO data was, and so there was a committee that said that there's something wrong. So what can be wrong? Your sample can be wrong. So it's not non-representative. So you are asking firms, let's say all firms in the north and nobody in the south. You could be asking all firms who are in mining and nobody in manufacturing. You could be asking a wrong sort of question. So suppose you said, oh, you didn't do your cognitive testing properly, and suppose you said that how many days out of the last 365 days were you employed? And usually people don't remember exactly, especially if it's casual sort of labor. Or you can ask very complicated questions to the firm also. How many days not were you employed, or did you employ how many people on each day? Or you could ask some very sort of difficult questions. So there can be many reasons why it doesn't work. But I think now they've gone back, taken the recommendations of the committee and started this quarterly employment survey, looking at firms above 10 employees, looking at them, so high frequency, which is every quarter. Earlier, there are some 5-yearly, NSS does 5-yearly, and then there used to be economic census, which gets done sometime once in 10 years, not exactly, you don't know exactly when. So you had, from both sides, you had various kinds of employment data, but this kind of, from the side of the firms, has been renewed. So it's not new, it's been renewed. Also that it's data that's collected all over the world, all countries collect.
But this point you made, Ila, about surveyors asking someone, are you employed now? Were you employed 3 months back? By itself, it indicates there is a sort of a volatility that, somebody may not have been employed 3 months back or 6 months back, because we all take employment for granted that, we have a job, which means we continue to have a job for fairly long stretches of time. But when you say that you talk about it this quarter, previous quarter, the quarter before that, it means it, like you said, a lot of casual kind of employment or informal sector employment.
So that is typically either when you look at it from the point of view of the household, so it's in a household survey that you typically ask this question, or to the firm when if the firm is doing a lot of contractual or daily wage employment, suppose it's construction. Okay, so in construction, you might have a construction company and you're asking that company, how many people are you employing this quarter, last quarter? How many have you employed over the year? What wages have you paid? Because, think about COVID restrictions. And obviously employment in construction went down very sharply because so this survey has been done for the period April to June. And April to June was the peak of your second wave of COVID, and there were restrictions, COVID restrictions during that time. So you had construction firms not employing people. So, and salaried people who have regular jobs are only a very small proportion of the total numbers who are employed in the country.
In fact, going to the numbers which we got this week, and I want your comments on what it indicates. 27% of establishments reported a decline in employment. This is the granular detail we got from for the quarterly period. Survey reported 88% of estimated workforce in 9 sectors comprised of regular workers. So regular workers seem to have kept their jobs. And 81% of workers employed in the 9 non-farm sectors received full wages. So there's a lot of, there is granularity, but also there is inconsistency or differences between sectors and the regular workers and the casual workers.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think the good thing about a survey like this is that it is able to capture this information, which we did not have earlier. So if you would look at construction versus, say, a company like ThePrint.
A media company.
Yeah. Services. You might find that, the contract varies. I mean, construction is far more casual, daily wage worker. And so you'll be able to, see trends also once this data starts coming in over time. But, so things like COVID and when those job losses or 27% decline happens, you'll be able to capture that as well pretty well in this.
And in the other one, which was the survey which gave us data from 2013-14 onwards, there was the most impressive growth came in the IT BPO sector with 152% increase growth. And sectors like health, financial services, manufacturing, construction also reported significant increases. But trade and accommodation and restaurants saw a decline, and percentage of female workers also declined.
See, one thing is that I don't think the comparisons are like to like. Okay, so you are comparing 2012-13 to a quarter, the worst hit perhaps in the world by the second wave of COVID. Okay, and so the comparison, if you want to capture trends, then actually you try to capture, say, if you want capturing a normal time in 2012-13, then you want to capture a normal time in 2021. You don't want to capture the worst possible quarter. So while it's a great thing that it's been done and it's been started, but I think when we make comparisons, we should make comparisons with subsequent quarters. And the comparisons for the economic census should be made with the 2020 economic census, the report will come out soon. I mean, there are many delays due to the COVID as well. But again, 2020 may not give you the best because it was also a COVID year. So, perhaps once the recovery has happened and you might need to go back and do the census again.
We've got quite a few questions, Ila. Let's start taking them. PB, who's a member for 2 months. Hi, PB. Is it time to focus and grow select services sectors, maybe healthcare and IT? Manufacturing seems like a bit of a lost cause given how India even today can't compete with other Asian tiger economies.
So, I mean, one way to answer this is to say that we should really be trying to, improve the environment and doing whatever people do. I mean, software was not something that was created by government policy. So when we say we should be trying to focus, I think the way the market functions is that people see what are the opportunities available and then they focus. I don't think that there should be a central planner who is going to decide that today we need heavy industry and we need a 5-year plan and we need money to go into that 5-year plan and then we need to import X, Y, and Z and not import A, B, and C. So when I'm asked a question like this, I like to say, let the market do what it does. You just create a good environment. Environment for everybody, not be selective about. So this would imply that we give a bad environment for manufacturing and we give a good environment for somebody else, or it would imply that we do central plan. So that's one way of answering this. But I think on another, level, the person wants to understand what the jobs data is telling us, and if it is if we want to get something meaningful from the jobs data, then I think we should follow this survey, see how sectors recover, and this in 2, 3, 4 years is going to show us how the economy, which parts of the economy, which sectors are recovering, and then you can try to understand what it is saying about jobs data in these various sectors. I don't think the first survey done properly can answer questions about trends.
I mean, like we've discussed earlier, all the PLI schemes that have been announced for specific sectors, that's the government trying to say that, okay, this sector probably holds more promise and that sector holds more promise, but we don't know what sectors. That's again some central planner's assumption.
Yeah, sometimes it's a central planner's assumption, plus I think that's a lot to do with the fear of imports replacing domestic manufacturing and trying to give protection. And I think we did a show on this once, and we did discuss how these should be limited for a certain period of time and not go on forever. So you should have ways to get out of any sort of either restrictions on the one hand or subsidy schemes on the other. Government should encourage them, yes, if they feel that there is unfair competition coming from somewhere else. But then beyond the infant industry argument, they need to get out of it.
Sankalp, another member for 2 months, seems to be responding to the previous questioner, asking, can we really say manufacturing is a lost cause? Manufacturing has moved as costs have risen. Is India not wage competitive with Asian tigers? Is there a talent deficit? Also, have we maxed out on IT? Lots of questions. Have we maxed out on IT?
No, I think we're going to, and we currently are. The world is witnessing a software boom. After COVID, everybody is setting up some customized software, some way to work. Much more of software than we have seen before, and the kind of boom that the world is facing is benefiting industries. In fact, if anecdotal evidence, again because we don't have too much actual evidence, but anecdotal evidence seems to suggest that engineers, a lot of them who were not even trained for software are now doing software but are getting jobs, and software companies have been hiring like crazy and giving high salaries. So that's, I'm just saying, anecdotal evidence. If once the data comes out, for some time we'll see what's happening, but I don't think we've maxed out on software. In fact, the better connectivity that has become available, more engineers, talent in the country, and the greater demand for software in the world helps us.
In fact, just to add to what Ila said, there have been recent reports which you can refer to, about how the next opportunity in software is software as a service, SaaS, where you don't buy software and just install it on your computer or forever. You just download it from a cloud for the duration you want to use it. And obviously your costs come down, but for software companies it's a huge opportunity because they can reach more people and even avoid the piracy problem. So, and that is, so many numbers have been quoted and thrown around. $2 trillion, $3 trillion opportunity numbers have been thrown around.
Also, even though India hasn't been great, Indian software industry hasn't been great so much on products. Okay, so I mean Microsoft selling Windows, it's not on product, but on service support. So customized support to companies and service provision to companies for fulfilling their software needs, not just making new kinds of software but also providing them services. And in fact, a lot of Indian companies have done outbound FDI where they have pretty much acquired software companies in, let's say, Europe, in Spain, in America, in various parts of the world, acquired their customers through that process and are now serving their customers. So it is interestingly enough, one of your biggest outbound FDI is in the software sector because of this software companies purchasing smaller service providing companies abroad.
Expanding through organic growth, as they say. Minhaj Ahmed Ansari, another member for 2 months. Hello, Minhaj. What about data on how much of our working population is employed? Does that exist? If yes, what is the trend there? Would it not be a better metric than just reporting job growth?
Yeah, that is, so something like the CMI household survey asks 2 questions actually which are relevant. So one is whether you're looking for work. So the working for age population, let's say between 18 and 60. So the age is identified. So you can identify whether a person is in the working age population. Then the question is, are you looking for work? And there, if you say you are looking for work, you are tagged as somebody who is a participant in the labor force. So the labor force participation is a number that is very relevant, not just the working age population. So you might be working age, but say if you're a student or if you're ill or if you're a mother at home who's not looking for a job or a father at home who's not looking for a job or for whatever reason, then you are not actually a labor force participant. And then the next question is whether you have a job. And you have data for all 3, and in CMI household survey does 3 waves following asking this. They have a panel of more than 200,000 households, and they go back and ask this question again and again, and you can look up their website and you'll find this very much there.
Srinivas VS, another new member. Hello Srinivas, welcome to the Print YouTube community. Professor, does a business entity get counted in formal or informal economy based on the number of employed or based on the amount of taxes they pay and the filing of returns?
On the employed. Okay. So you are typically, so you can look at formal as somebody who pays taxes. You can look at formal as a company that is registered in the MCA database. You could look at formal by this arbitrary definition where it says, okay, formal if you use power over, you have 10 people and you use power. So that was typically the definition that would be used for formal sector in manufacturing. But here, when actually we look at non-manufacturing, then we go beyond that using power definition that used to be typically used for formal sector. And we therefore say any firm that employs more than 10 people gets counted in this definition of formal. But there are many other countries and many other economists in many parts of the world who look at it as whether you keep your accounts, whether you're registered, whether you pay taxes, and so on also.
Karun Menon, another member who's been with us for more than a month. Ma'am, once the pandemic is over, what will be the future of the 37-year term of demographic dividend in India? How will India optimize this term when the employability rate is very low?
Sorry?
He says the demographic dividend was forecast for a period of 37 years. But now the pandemic has sort of hurt that.
I haven't seen new calculations for this. So let's wait and see for somebody to
If
do
there is
the
a change.
calculations, and we'll get YP to surely report those numbers and the
Absolutely, we will
calculations
do
when
that
there is
as soon
a.
as the
We'll do a
numbers
story
are-
on that. I'm sure the print will do a
Yeah.
story on that. But I haven't done those calculations. No.
Aditya Gupta, a new member. Hello, Aditya, welcome. Given how socialist the people in India are, I don't know where he got that idea. What incentives can be given to companies that require long-term capital investment, chip manufacturing, aircraft manufacturing, etc.?
I mean, what does the first part of the question have to do with the
Given
second
how
part?
socialist people in India are, what incentives can be given to companies that require long-term
So are
capital?
you trying to say that you should give incentives, or are you trying to say that they are too socialists and will not give incentives? And what are the incentives for each sector? I mean, I guess we should get sector experts for each of the sectors and what exactly. I don't know much about aircraft manufacturing, honestly.
But this assumption that, how socialist people in India are, I mean, I don't get that assumption.
Well, perhaps maybe he means that people want this to be done in the public sector. Yeah, well.
Aditya, come back with some clarification and we'll try and figure that out. SM, a new member, markets should prevail. For job creation in certain sectors, reforms are needed. Labor reforms, land reforms are a precursor for certain sectors. Are central planners focused on these areas?
Well, certainly they're trying to do some reforms. So, the land acquisition bill, for example, was done in 2013, made it difficult to buy land. Then after the 2014 government came in, they tried to amend that. That didn't work. Now it's gone back to states doing a lot of those amendments. And basically what is being tried is to make it easier to acquire land when either you're doing a business or infrastructure or certain kinds of activities. So on that, because it was also a state subject, so I was actually in the ministry at the time when Mr. Jaitley was the finance minister, and he was focused on the land acquisition bill as one of the amendment to the land acquisition bill, because the UPA had brought in a bill in 2013 which had made it very difficult to acquire land. So he was pretty focused on that, but that didn't go through at that time, and there was opposition. But now the states are doing that. For the labor, the first thing that is being done is the four labor codes have been brought in, and there have been a lot of reforms in labor. A lot of the states have already adopted them, and some of the states are on their way to adopting them. I think we've done some reports, and Sheikh has also done a CTC on that. So maybe if you could provide links
provide
to
those links, yeah.
Moshmi
Yeah.
has done a report, and so perhaps those links can be provided.
We'll take some questions from non-members. This one is from Vish K.I. think. Vish, we would have taken a question earlier if you were a member, so there is an incentive to become a member. Infrastructure projects create jobs like nowhere else. Monetization is to raise money for infrastructure projects and thereby create jobs. Please comment. So is that something you agree with?
Yeah, infrastructure creates an environment in which people can do businesses. So the actual direct job creation from infrastructure is limited to the time when the infrastructure is being built, and then it goes down sharply. But after that, it actually creates an environment for where you can have shops. So if you have a road, you can you become closer to the port, you trade. It actually bridges, railways, airports. They allow you to trade, they allow you to export. So that's how they create jobs. So I agree that yes, building infrastructure is a prerequisite. So if you don't have power, can you have factories running? Bottom line.
Yeah. This is Vladimir Trump. I know it's not Vladimir Trump. It used to be Vladimir Putin, now it's become
Now
Vladimir
he's
Trump.
Vladimir Trump.
You should become a member. I'm sure you can afford it, Vladimir Trump. Why were unemployment rates in India high even before COVID, when unemployment rates were at a historic low in countries named USA and Norway and other Western countries?
Okay, so developing countries have structural issues of unemployment, and developed countries like the ones you've named have cyclical and frictional unemployment. So let me just describe to you what these are, so it helps you to understand how their employment or unemployment situation is different from ours. So basically, in developed countries, you find that the unemployment happens when the economy is in a recession. Then there are people who lose jobs because of lower economic activity, or people are unemployed when they've left one job and are looking for another job. So the first being cyclical and the second being frictional. Okay. Now, typically, what happens in countries like ours, what is structural? So structure has to do with the structure of the economy and the transformation that happens in an economy but takes a very long time. So these were structural transformations that happened in, say, the US or UK to a century ago, more than that. That is, people moving from agriculture to manufacturing. Now, here if you look at, particularly you start looking from the period since independence, the bulk of the labor force was in agriculture, and very slowly over time it has moved to services and manufacturing. And in fact, the issue has been that because of high productivity in these sectors, which happened due to various improvements in technology, the absorptive capacity of these sectors has been low. So the kind of movement you saw in erstwhile in countries that are now developed in a century ago are not happening today. That sort of movement from agriculture to manufacturing didn't happen actually in India. About even GDP 17% being in manufacturing, and we flipped more to services. So we have these structural issues, and unemployment is structured. Second, because of agriculture still employing about 40% of our workforce, so about 65 to 70% people live in rural areas, and if you look at the employment of those people, then about 40% odd people workers are employed in the agricultural sector, which has a lot of seasonality. So out of the total workforce, if 40% people are facing seasonality, then the seasonal factor, in addition to the structural factor, becomes a factor that affects our employment at any point of time. So, our nature of employment and our nature of unemployment that's why different from those countries.
Okay. I think we have time for one last question, although we've crossed 30 minutes. There are two questions. I'll give you a choice to take which one. One is again from Karun Menon. He says, what will be the future of jobs in the automobile sector when the sector is facing high turbulence in India? Automobile sector is one of the success stories after 1991. The last other question is there a threat of a command structure economy or command structure economics, given the poll promises that are being doled out? Is there a scope for it, or is it only election gimmick? You want to take automobile, or you want to take command structure economics?
In the poll promises, what is the command structure?
States promising people that we will do this for you, we will, it's a very welfare kind of a...
Let's take that question, because it actually has a deeper answer. So even when states are welfare states, let's say in Europe, the states say distribution is something we'll do. We'll redistribute wealth. We'll tax some people and we will redistribute it to others through whatever means. Then the state is a welfare state. But if production remains within the private sector and means of production are owned by private companies, then it is not a command structure. So study Europe, for example, and I think that will answer your question. What you see is welfareism plus production happens in markets. So what this tries to do is you try to achieve productive efficiency. So it's not that you have a PSU trying to produce airline services and collapsing the way Air India did, but or MTNL trying to produce services. But you have private companies doing production, and yet the state, when it comes to elections and promises, is maybe even more than ours actually. Promises welfare. So distribution is done by the state. State is redistributed. So distinguish between production and redistribution, and which is the command economy.
I hope that answers your question, and we will be back next week with more economic ideas and analysis and insights. Hope you enjoyed this one this week. From the number of viewers, it looks like it was a good discussion, and we will be back next week. Thank you so much. Have a good weekend.